Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to yet another trek through the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. We are on Volume 13, Chapter 5. We're slowly, steadily getting through this novel, but like I said before, it's perfectly fine because as long as I got stuff to talk about, we'll take as long as we can take, even though it might frustrate some people, but yeah, thanks as always for everybody that dropped by for the premieres. Hey chat, how's it going? Hopefully you guys hit the like button already. If you didn't, shame on you. I know you gotta find out if you like the video before you like it, right? And as per usual, thanks to everybody that supports the channel monetarily through Patreon, our tips link, memberships, all that kind of stuff. It means so much to me. You guys are so absolutely amazing, and I could not do this without you guys. But yes, I will say, I know I gave people a warning last Mushoku Monday that I might turn into a bumbling idiot, but I managed to get through it. I managed to make it through without shedding tears, but whew, Chapter 5 is a doozy, so we'll see. Trigger warning for the crying for Chapter 5. Chapter 6 was an absolute blast. Chapter 7, haven't completed completely, so if I do get to that point before Mushoku Monday ends, I might have to take a pause and read it and then come back in. But yeah, we'll see. But with all that said, let's jump into Chapter 5, Paternal Dignity. 3 more months slipped by. It was summer and the snow melted completely. They landed in the middle of a hot, dry stretch. Rius had spent most of the year mooning over Lucy, looking after her with his spare time. She was his first and only child, so it was natural to adore her. He spent many days looking over her angelic, chubby-cheeked face. It put a goofy grin on his. I like this. I like seeing Rudius being a father. Partly because everything happened with Paul, but mainly around the idea that I've said before, it's hard to really gather Rudius as somebody who actually wanted a child. Again, it all pretty much started with him just wanting to bang, and wanting to just imprint on Sylphie, wanting to get that trophy child. But now it's all about Lucy. He absolutely adores her. He's pretty much turning into Paul, which is constantly mooning over his child and just the goofy faces and everything. It's really heartwarming. I'm glad to see that it wasn't just a trophy. This is something that has really changed his life. And yes, you got hints of that when we first had the announcement of her being pregnant, but still, this is like putting it in solidified form. He was technically the head of the household, and really didn't exude his authority. Reese wanted to act in a relatively dignified fashion around his wife and his sisters. With him spending so much of his time cooing over his baby like an idiot, surely their opinion of him would be affected. I don't think so. For this reason, he intended to be a stern father. Tough, but fair. Paul probably had similar thoughts looking down at him as a baby. A father should inspire awe in his children, an example to them. A goal to reach. Nobody wants to be you, Rudius. Nobody wants to be you, Rudius. Lucy, please don't be Rudius. But again, that's kind of similar to the whole situation with Paul. Paul looking down on Rudius was wanting to be that father figure. I'm tough. He's going to look at me and think, man, I want to be just like Paul. But yet, Paul had all these flaws. You didn't want Rudius to be Paul. Paul was a dirtbag. But still, if you just hone in on what makes a father and what Paul did that was so great, yeah, that's something to aspire to. You don't look at all of your father's flaws and say, man, I want to make sure I do those things. You look at what they do and they achieve and you go, holy crap, he did great things. He was a strong father. He supported his family his entire life. That was my father. And yeah, sure, of course, I aspire to be that. Not exactly that, but something similar, the symbol of it, not necessarily everything that it is. At one point, Rudius thought that Paul was pitiful, even pathetic, but now he knew better. He had been a magnificent, here we go already, he had been a magnificent father. Flaws, yes, plenty of them, but wonderful nonetheless. And I love that he keeps that as his sort of center. Despite the fact that I've seen these things, despite the fact that I looked around the sculpture and I seen all these cracks, the front of it was still perfect. The front of it was still something great. It still held up that pillar. Reese had no right to criticize his faithlessness as a husband. It was best to focus on the positive. Bingo. Bingo. I don't know if I said that earlier because I read this earlier, but yes, bingo. That's exactly right. Nobody is going to be stainless. Nobody's going to be without stains. And always focusing on trying to find those stains aren't going to do you any good. Because because in most cases, that's not what makes a person. Just like the whole statements he keeps making about Roxy. This idea that it's not really necessarily this, it's a culmination of all these other things that makes a person. So what if you can't throw a water ball as good as I can? You're still amazing because of all these other things. Rudius wanted to follow in Paul's footsteps. With Sylphie gone today, Rudius had to step up to the plate. Seeing Lucy fussing, he made noises and called out to her until she laughed. She was so cute, wondering if there was anything more adorable than a baby smile. His wife gave birth to a literal angel by mistake. Realizing he got sidetracked, he wanted to be stern and dignified. I like this. I'm gonna be stern. I'm gonna be super good dad. I'm gonna be stern. Such a dad. Rudius felt the ideal father was close enough to his children to be caring, but distant enough to guide them forward. Normally, he should be gentle with his kid. When necessary, however, he shouldn't hesitate to give a firm scolding. When they needed support, they should always step up to the plate for them. That was the ideal father, as Rudius seen it. I sort of agree here. I mean, I've not been a father myself, but my experience with a father, I think he did a really phenomenal job. It's just this idea that, yeah, now granted for me, for my father, I think he cared for us. He was very terrible at showing it, but I think he did care for us. I mean, he looked out for us. He did everything that he really needed to do for us. He was constantly working just to be able to support our family. But I don't really, he never had a caring touch. Like, he never had a soothing touch. Like, he never came to me and just patted me on the back and said, is everything going okay? He was always, it felt like he was very distant. So if anything, I think that was probably the only side of him that I didn't think did a good job. Now, again, I still love him, and I knew deep down inside he did love us. He just wasn't affection outwardly. But he was good at controlling his scolding. He never scolded us out of line. It was always, we did something wrong. And I think he showed just enough correction in those moments. Not too much, but enough that when we did mess up again, we were afraid of him. And I think that was necessary. The belt came off. I think that's a good sign. I think, for me personally, I felt like that kept us in line. It kept us respecting authority. It kept us respecting him as a father, but not too much to the point where we felt like we were just terrified of him. But would I have wanted more of that? I don't know. I don't know how much that would affect his fathering. He obviously chose that was how he was going to treat us. And it's kind of similar to Paul and Rudius in the situation right here. Was he a perfect father? You could probably criticize some things, but in the end, it was still his father. So who knows? It sort of sounded like Rudius was describing his impressions of Paul. Yes, in describing a father figure, he's like, I think that's actually Paul, which is great. Again, I think that kind of just hands itself over to you. Even with its flaws, you're like, yeah, I kind of want to be like Paul. I kind of want to be like my father. Rudius thought, was Paul my ideal of a perfect dad then? He didn't want his children to think that he was pathetic, to be honest. I don't want them to see me like I've seen Paul for the longest time. Then again, it was partially Paul's weaknesses that endeared Rudius to him. And again, I think that's partly true. Even with my experience with my dad, even with his flaws, that made him human. That made him not just a figure. That made him who he was. I don't necessarily think I'd want a perfect dad. A dad that did everything right. Because if you don't have a father that shows some sort of flaws, it doesn't make you able to connect to them, and plus, you don't know what mistakes are. My dad made a lot of mistakes as we were growing up. We had a long trip one time, and we had plenty of mistakes during that trip, but still, every mistake he made, he went out of his way in order to fix it. So I seen him fixing things constantly. That's a good thing. Oh my gosh, this chapter's already getting me, and I'm not even into it yet. The part that I totally forgot about this part, by the way. Rudius even points it out here. I gained a lot of lessons from his examples. Paul may have looked pitiful sometimes, but yet he was always a wonderful dad to Norn. And that's a funny thing. Remember in Norn's chapter? She was pointing out that, yes, father drank. And yes, it messed with him. But it was okay, because he had to do that. She was acceptant of this massive flaw that Paul had. We're in trouble. We're all scattered across the world. We still haven't found Zenith. Rudius finally just showed up. He didn't even know if Rudius was alive at that point. And he's drinking. He's stuck in a mug. That's a massive flaw. But Norn accepted it. She didn't accept other people doing it, but she accepted him doing it because she trusted him. That drinking wasn't a sum of Paul. It was everything else that made Paul who he was. Norn adored Paul. Reese figured love and compassion to be most important. Lucy began fussing again, cradling her. She began to cackle. His heart couldn't take much more of this cuteness. That's when Suzanne spoke up. Yes, his hired wet nurse and former adventuring friend. Rudius. Yes, Suzanne? I don't mind soothing the little lady as she fusses. You know, it's part of the job. I appreciate the offer, but I like to keep these blissful moments to myself. Thank you very much. She doesn't really get to do much sitting over there. Rudius and Suzanne had lost contact about 4 years ago. She had seen his posting for a wet nurse job, and he was shocked to see her again. Oh, well, if you really want to do it yourself, feel free. Is there any man in the world who doesn't want to soothe their newborn daughter? Can't see my husband is too eager to deal with it. How shameful. It sounds like he needs education and the joys of fatherhood. At this point, I started wondering, who is the father? Who is going to be the father? I mean, it could have been Patrice, but I was pointing more towards Timothy. If she's in this capital, it's going to be him because this is his hometown. But honestly, I didn't know where Patrice was hometown to. I think he was more in the south central continent or something like that. Somewhere around there. Because I think the only reason that Counter Arrow went up there is because he's familiar with it. Rudius remembered his time spent with Suzanne and Counter Arrow. He was grateful to all of them for reaching out to him. Yes, I did not want to read this whole segment. It's just literally, here's Volume 7. Let's talk about Volume 7. It was interesting how very vague a certain aspects it was, but honestly, again, it's kind of one of those aspects of if Rudius himself is first person talking about the story, he's not like going to go over all the details. But it does make me wonder if this segment right here was original to the web novel. Because from what I understand, I thought that Counter Arrow and all that stuff was specific to Volume 7, so maybe he just carried it over to the new light novel adaptation. Which does, yes, give me a lot more hope at the idea of seeing somebody like Sarah. We'll see. Or maybe even Timothy again. After they went their separate ways, Suzanne had got married to Timothy. There you go. The leader of the party. They moved back here together because Shariah was Timothy's hometown. They had 2 children together, and unfortunately the third was premature and died soon after. Oof. I can't even imagine what that's like. Her body's still producing milk, despite its passing, so she decided to sell her services as a wet nurse. Reese had stopped in to say hello to Timothy. The man hadn't changed a bit. According to Suzanne, though, Rudius had changed a lot. Back when they adventured together, he would have never insulted a woman's husband in front of her. He just insulted Timothy, and she's like, wow, you've changed a lot. Normally you wouldn't do that. Yes, back when he was adventuring, man, he was all about like, sorry, you know, keep out of people's eyes. That's what ticked off everybody. I mean, Suzanne thought it was, apparently, I don't think she ever mentioned it when that volume was going on, but she admits here that, yeah, he was creepy. And yes, Soldat, it ticked him off. That's what made Soldat berate him all the time, is because he had this stupid demeanor about himself. He kept people at a distance with that. It's something that he slowly broke away from at the university because he suddenly had friends and they were all telling him, dude, stop, please. Let's be comfortable with each other. This is true. He didn't want to offend anybody if he could avoid it, but he wasn't walking on eggshells these days. A lot had happened since then. Growth is the main key thing. Suzanne's seen his insults as teasing though, so she was fine with it. Him saying those to her face made it more comfortable. She likes that bickering. I mean, you can't have... It breaks that ice. Now, yes, you say something extremely offensive and that person wasn't ready for it, it's probably going to be a different story, but it shows you're comfortable with somebody. Reese figures his change was due to his friends at the university. Having more people to talk to casually. Hell, you could stand to be a little more casual around me in general. You're technically my employer, you know. I suppose so, but that's no reason to treat you impolitely. She rolled her eyes. Whatever you say, kid. Reese owed Suzanne a lot. She showed him the ropes in adventuring in the Northern Territories. He couldn't bring himself to be casual with her. There you go. Create that divide. Reese cannot get away from this completely. He will still create those divides. Nope, can't. I mean, it's so funny how he criticizes, you know, like Lilia and stuff like that about this kind of stuff. And yet he does it himself. Constantly creating these divides that blocks you from getting too comfortable with somebody. It's almost like keep them at arm's length. Don't get too close. But that is an aspect of that respect, and I think it's so ingrained in his mind to be like that. He spent so much of this life doing that, and yeah, he spent a lot of it in Japan doing that. So it's almost that basic instinct within him to keep doing that. I owe her a lot of respect. Keep her distance. Suzanne spoke up. Well, I guess it's all good with me as long as I get a paycheck. Of course, I'll tip you handsomely, I assure you. Reese knew that she was saying that, but she had been wonderful so far. He had fears of sadistic babysitters from his previous life. But Suzanne handled Lucy like her own child. He also knew that she wasn't the type of person who'd mistreat a child. That was kind of my mindset when I started reading into this segment. I'm like, that was all Suzanne was about. She's the big sis type. Sarah is a prime example of that. Suzanne brought her in, took care of her like pretty much like her child. Suzanne and Timothy were currently living at Timothy's parents' house, giving her the ability to step away from her sons, who were a handful. She complained to Lilia about how it was tough to live under the same roof as her mother-in-law. While Rudius figured that Lilia would probably identify with the mother-in-law, they were about the same age. It seemed like they got along, and he had seen them drinking together. This one was like a little bit weird for me, this idea of why he'd go out of his way to say, yeah, she's bickering about the mother-in-laws, but Lilia's probably over here going, yeah, actually, I think I side more with the mother-in-law. It's like, why? Why would that be the case? Nothing about the two of them would kind of indicate that aspect of her leaning towards them or her. Unless it's just trying to point out that idea of that being the other person separate from the original family, but it doesn't make any sense to me. Suzanne was curious if Rudius wanted a boy rather than a girl. He didn't really mind it, since he really wasn't a noble or he didn't have any wealth or business. Discussions like this came up a few times after Lucy was born. Zenoba had brought it up, Ariel brought it up. It was important for royalty and noble houses in Asura. He even heard that newborn boys were being whisked away to distant relatives and adopted by the Boreas family. Yeah, that was that whole power struggle that was happening with the Boreas family. But no, I think this is interesting because they've actually brought this up several times. Like, even before they knew that it was a girl, they were still bringing up that aspect of, well, you gotta need a boy, right? Because you need to pass it on. And it does technically make sense because, yes, Rudius, despite the fact that Paul left his family, he's technically does have a noble name. So there is like a lot of emphasis in the idea of kind of carrying that on. Now, being an heir to the family or to the wealth itself, if I remember correctly, back when Rudius brought this up before, he said there wasn't really anything in play that really prevented him from being able to pass anything on to her. I mean, it's not like when he's going to pass away, he goes, all right, Lucy, I want you to have all of my money. And then suddenly the government busts the door and says, nope, not a boy, give it here. But it does kind of lend itself more better, the idea physically that maybe possibly a boy would be able to carry on that legacy a little bit better. But there's a lot of strong women in this world, so that's not even the case either. Lucy could grow up to be as strong as Ghislaine. Who knows? Chat. But I guess, again, it's still, especially from Zenoba and Ariel's perspective, that's obviously going to be a question mark. Anybody else, I don't know why they would care. But I mean, it's just conversation. It's not like anybody's criticizing him for having a baby girl. But Rudius didn't care about all that. He just wanted his kid to grow up happy. If anything, he'd like having the cuter option. He's like, yeah, I don't really care about that as long as they're happy, and I'm cool with the cuter one. The girl's gonna be the cuter one. I mean, if it carries the elf blood more, then it could still be cute. Rudius was honestly outnumbered in the house. Yes, there's no other boys. But he didn't mind being surrounded by cute girls and charming women. It wasn't like they were bullying him either. They were almost too nice to him. Suzanne spoke up. Hey, that's the spirit. Wish my husband would take a page out of your book. The moment I got pregnant, he was talking about all the stuff he wanted to do if it turned out to be a boy. Didn't even spare a minute's thought about the alternative. Well, you got boys in the end, so I guess it turned out all right. Yeah, I guess. I got mixed feelings about it, though. The third one was a girl, you know. That happened to my mom. It sucked so bad. That happened to my mom. She had several boys, and then finally, she wished so badly to have a girl, and then she lost it. It hurts. It's home. Again, I can't even imagine. There's two aspects here. One is just the idea of losing a child. Like, you carry it. Like, especially if it's a late term, you're carrying this child this whole time, and then you lose it. Like, it's a part of yourself. Oh, I cannot even imagine that. My heart goes out to all women that deal with that kind of stuff. That I can't even imagine. But then add on to that the aspect of, like, I could have had a girl. I wanted this. I was so excited to have a girl, and I lost it. Oh. Rudius responded, right, sorry. That was a dumb thing to say. Rudius found himself wondering what it would have felt if Lucy had been a stillborn. The thought was horrible enough. Yeah, it's fine. We'll just try again. Suzanne seemed nonchalant about it. Was losing a baby really something you could shrug off like that? Oh, I get so angry right here. Rudius, shut your thought. What would be the term? Shut your thought mouth? I don't know. Stop your thinking. You know that wrecked Suzanne. There ain't no doubt about it. And again, it's that whole aspect of, I guess it's just kind of making a false assumption based on how somebody's acting. Rudius, you should know that this is what people do. Suzanne's covering it up. Suzanne is covering it up. She carried that child. Of course she's broken that she lost it. That hurts. Now, truth be told, Suzanne could possibly be from some certain group or something that doesn't connect to their children until they're birthed, alive. Maybe she has a certain belief process there. I don't know. But I would imagine, there's no doubt in my mind, this sucks. And it probably devastated her for a long time. And she's trying to hide it. Rias thought, was losing a baby really something you could shrug off like that? Rias knew that he would take it hard. And it wasn't easy for Sylphie to get pregnant. There was no telling how long it would take for them to get another shot. Sylphie would also be devastated. He could see her crying her eyes out, apologizing for losing their child. Just the thought hurt his stomach. Yeah, I do really truly think that would have probably been extremely devastating to Sylphie. Now, I haven't gotten a perspective of Sylphie and her caring for her child. All we've really gotten so far is her breastfeeding and saying how cute she is. Mainly because we don't have any inner thoughts of Sylphie to give us a perspective of her as a mother. I'm sure she's a fine mother. Don't get me wrong, chat, chill out. But I would assume that this means a lot to her. That she does adore Lucy. I don't see any reason why she wouldn't. But there's another side to this. Like putting aside how she feels about having a child, put aside how much she loves Lucy, just the mere aspect of delivering to Rudius was important. She was terrified that she would never get pregnant. She felt like this was something that Rudius, the one I adore the most, wants so badly. I gotta have this child. I need to get pregnant so I can give him a child. This is important to him. If I don't, he's gonna leave to go get somebody else. That was the big question mark that was around the idea of him getting a second wife or a mistress. The idea that she was okay with Rudius having a child through somebody else because she couldn't get pregnant. So yeah, her losing that would have been devastating to her. She would not have been able to fulfill her role as a wife. And that was massively important to her. Putting aside what you believe that is not the case, that was important to her. And Rudius was so big on it, I think it kind of impressioned on her that I need to do this. Rudius thought, but things went well. He could enjoy their good fortune. So anyways, I'm assuming that you guys dissolved your party at some point, right? We should talk about Counter Arrow. Yeah, not long after you left the town. When you're as mediocre as we were, it gets pretty tough when you lose a core member. Patrice said that he was going to go back to Astra to become a soldier, and we sort of all fell apart on the spot. Do you know what happened to Sarah? You're curious? Yeah, a little. Well, she's still out there making a living as an adventurer. You don't see many archers around since it's a lot easier to throw a fireball. But she's got the skills and experience now. She'll be just fine anywhere she goes. Ah, okay. If there's anything you left unsaid, you should probably go look for her. Sooner rather than later. Never know when an adventurer will get themselves killed. Interesting. The party, let's go back to the beginning part. The party itself dissolving. She said she lost a core member. It's sort of, the way that it's wrote right here sort of implies the idea of losing Rudius. But Rudius was never a part of their party. Let's be perfectly clear. I think what she's obviously talking about here is that they lost Mimir. And Rudius was sort of filling that gap. They were a party before. They went to the Northern Territories. Rudius started being a temporary party members, but they were still a party without Rudius. They were still balanced. Rudius even himself said, this party is really balanced. But they lost Mimir. And Rudius sort of filled that gap as a temporary for quite a while. So the moment that Rudius departed and just ditched, their party lost that balance. So yeah, Patrice is like, all right, I'm heading out too. And Timothy's like, well, guess that's a wrap. It's all over now. But it looks like, it's very interestingly enough, looks like Sarah continued on. So the only one that's adventuring still is Sarah. Patrice is now a soldier. So interesting shift, which is more and more pointing to the idea that we're probably going to see Sarah. No, we're going to see Sarah. Now, granted, I don't necessarily think that Rudius himself needs to see Sarah. I think he's fine now. Like, again, he's fixed his issues that he was facing when he was with Sarah. He's gotten some closure around Edis. Now, he hasn't talked to Edis yet, but he's at least got that closure through Rizurd. He hasn't thought about that since then. Ever since Rizurd said, look, I think you're misinterpreting that, he hasn't thought about Edis. But I think for Sarah, because they developed so much in that Volume 7 about Sarah, I want her to have that closure. I hope to have her get some closure there. That all said, I do believe that despite the fact that Rudius hasn't really been thinking about Sarah at all, really at all, I still think there is, even for him, a bit of closure that could be seen there. I made this mistake. I screwed this up. You never know. Maybe there's a possibility. Even if you don't constantly think about it, there's those times when you go, man, I hope Sarah's okay. I kind of screwed up there. Or, man, I hope she doesn't hate me still. There is, again, still a nice little closure there, and I hope that he gets that. But yes, that's technically true, this idea that you better find her and find some closure, because she's still an adventurer, and you never know when an adventurer is going to end up dead. Reese felt it didn't seem necessary for him. It was just a fling in the past. Finding her wasn't going to do him any good. It was hard to imagine that Sarah wanted to remember that whole mess. Yeah, I guess. I mean, he doesn't know what Sarah's mindset is. He doesn't know what Sarah was going through. Again, and it's sadly one of those things that for the anime only, he's never going to get that perspective. He never knew that she found some sort of closure there, and that was through the help of Elise. And so yes, you can probably argue that every person deals with that differently. Sarah could end up going off and completely forgetting about him, finding another boy, and she's super happy, and she's gotten married. She's going to get married soon or something like that. And so him popping up and going, hey, I just want to talk about what happened. It's just gonna be like, I don't want to get into that stuff. I've left it behind. But the opposite is, he doesn't know that she might be possibly in the same position he is back when he got left by Edis. So it might be important for her to have that closure. It doesn't mean that if you find Sarah, you're like, crap, now we gotta get married, I guess, because we almost did it. No, it just simply tell her, look, I'm okay. Are you okay? I'm sorry about what happened. Let me explain. And then she goes, wait, at least told me everything. Don't worry about it. You don't have to explain that stuff. Here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. Suzanne turned to the door to find Zenith standing quietly. Lilia lurking right behind her. Mom? While Zenith didn't respond, Lilia spoke up. Pardon the intrusion, Master Rudius. Zenith's eyes were a bit unfocused. She stepped forward and sat down next to Rudius, positioning herself to look at Lucy's face. Don't worry, Mom. Lucy's doing just fine today. Not reacting to this, Zenith just stared at Lucy so intently. It seems she forgot others were in the room. She's coming there and she's just, there's this girl right here. I gotta focus on this baby. Anytime it talks about Zenith, it hurts so bad. I think I've finally gotten closure around Paul. I think Refugion's done a good job of giving me closure around Paul, but Zenith is still a sore spot. I guess because Paul is what's done is done and has been accepted fully by Rudius, and Zenith is still this lingering pain. And again, because a lot of it has to do with just massive amount of experience around this kind of stuff. After arriving at the house, it felt like Zenith had become noticeably more active, which again, I think is for a reason. I think there's something in that house that's drawing negative mana or something out of her. I really do think at this point it's mana sickness. Even though we haven't really talked much about it and how it works in that series, it feels like it's probably going to be that. She was trying to feed Norn at the table, gardening with Aisha, and when he was with Lucy, she stopped in to check on them. Again, this is what I was really talking about before with the whole Aisha thing, with her in the garden and Zenith coming out there to see her. It really does feel like she's going out of her way in order to see everybody. Somebody's doing something over here. She wants to be a part of this family, and she's going out of her way to do that. And again, we don't know yet why that is. It could be her going through the motions, but I feel like she's connecting with, this is my family, and I want to be there with them. I want to be there with everything they're doing. I want to be involved. So yes, every time Rudius is in there with Lucy, she comes by the door and says, oh, time to be with Lucy. It's time to spend time with Lucy. There was subtle differences in how she reacted to Roxy and Sylphie. Her facial expressions never seemed to change, and she still hadn't spoken a word, but she was moving, changing. Maybe inching her way to something like a recovery. Again, this hurts because it's like, I wish. I wish. At first, Rudius was nervous about her being near Lucy, Zenith's symptoms being something similar to dementia. He was worried that she might harm Lucy, for no reason at all, without even meaning to. By this point, it was obvious they had nothing to worry about. All she ever did was watch Lucy quietly. Yeah, that is a hard thing. That's 100%, that is uncomfortable truth. That is, I hate that this is a thing, but I have to be careful. It is something similar to what we were talking about last Mushoku Monday about the idea of having a pet and how it can be dangerous around children, especially infants. Infants are very, very fragile. And so you don't want anything near that child that could possibly harm them. That's why a lot of people will lock up all their cabinets and everything, especially when the child starts to walk around and crawl around. You don't want anything to possibly harm that child. Even so much as some people get rid of certain tables because they have too sharp of edges. You don't want to put that danger near them. It's so easy to make a mistake, and you harm them either permanently or worse. And it sucks to have to think about that, but that is honestly a thing. You have this person that is not 100% in the head. It's very scary having them around a child. As much as it hurts to say, no, Zenith, you can't be near this baby. That sucks to have to say that. But that is technically a thing. We dealt with it with our family. There's certain things that you had to go, we can't do that. Or if you do, you have to be very, very careful with it. Like with this situation. Yes, she could be near this infant, but I'm going to make sure that I keep an eye on how she's acting. Because you don't know if she's suddenly going to have a trigger into a mindset, maybe a tap of a memory temporarily where suddenly they're angry. That was something that was, when we were dealing with dementia specifically, some of the family members were looking into a lot of horror stories around it. And yes, that aspect that sometimes the decay will happen in areas where you have judgment and stuff like that, and it leaves areas that are more about anger. And there's a lot of cases of people that get angry. They get very violent. And it sucks. Thankfully, we didn't have to deal with that, but it is a thing. So again, it's one of those aspects of like, oh, this hurts to read, but at the same time, I'm like, I know what he's going through. I know what he's thinking. I thought that same thing, and it sucked to have to think that. It sucks to think that your family would be violent. Violent. Speak, Andrew. But yes, all she ever did was watch Lucy quietly. He never got a hint of negative emotions from her. Just a woman gazing peacefully at her grandchild. While he felt guilty for doubting Zenith, she never had been violent to anyone before. I want to make a joke right now just to correct myself. That we know of. Back in her young prime days was super violent. Lucy seemed to understand that she meant well. She was all smiles when Zenith visited. It was pretty heartwarming. And that picture. Again, there's still a side of me that almost wonders if there's sort of a false connection happening with Zenith. That she's connecting to Paul. Like she's seeing Paul and Rudius or Paul and Norn or something like that. But I truly think at this point, I think she has figured everything out. I think she's figuring it out. And so I think right now she's connecting that Aisha's outside. She's connecting that she's feeding Norn. And right here, I think she's connecting. This is my grandchild. Such a beautiful picture. Still, there was a lot they didn't know about her condition. While hard to imagine anything bad coming from these visits, it was probably best for them to stay supervised. After all, accidents can happen, even when intentions are good. Which again, like I said before, fully understand that. I don't judge them for that. We did the same thing. And it's not 100% about protecting the child. Because yes, a lot of it is. There's also an aspect of protecting the one that is having these problems. I would hope that if something happened to me, that people would do the same thing for me. I hate the idea that I might possibly drop a child or something like that. Or I might accidentally exert too much energy. That's like with the whole thing with Zenoba. That breaks my heart. Despite the fact that he's a little bit goofy, that sucks to think about that. That sucks to grow up thinking I killed my brother. That sucks. He was just a innocent little baby, and I harmed it. Suddenly, Zenith looked up at Rudius. It was like she was trying to send him a message with her eyes. Not that he had any idea what that might mean. But that might mean. Damn it, 7Cs. Every chapter now. Every freaking chapter now. Not that he had any idea what that might mean. Apparently it's might mean. Somebody showed me the updated PDF. Come on, 7Cs. Seriously. But yeah, anyways. It was as if she was trying to send him a message. Not that he had any idea what that might mean. Seconds later, Lucy started fussing loudly. She knew. And then there's... Okay, yes, the obvious answer here is that Zenith's a mom. She's raised 3 kids. She knows. She has that instinct within her. She can just look at a baby and go, here it comes. There's like a mom timer. Here it comes. Beep. Then there's another side of me that's like, I wonder if she's talking to the baby. Pardon me, Miss Zenith. Lilia reached down and gently took Lucy from them. Suzanne then took her to check the diaper and look for rashes. Nodding, she knew it was time to feed. Zenith knew. It had been a couple hours since Sylphie fed her. Time slipped by since then. Well, then I guess I'll step out of the room. I don't mind if you watch, you know. Suzanne's like, you're welcome to watch if you want. It was kind of her to offer, but he declined politely. They were old friends, but that didn't mean he wanted to look at a married woman. That didn't keep you from looking at Zenith all the time. He's changed a lot. Rudius has changed a lot. He still thinks about a lot of perverted things, but he's changed a lot. Suzanne was well endowed, like Zenith and Lilia. Actually, larger than before. If he got a glimpse of them, the wise old hermit inside of him might get aroused from slumber. If Roxy or Sylphie got wind of it, it might make them disheartened. They were both on the flat side, but he didn't choose them based on their bodies. He didn't want them self-conscious about it, which is a good thing. That is honestly something that I can see. I mean, shoot. What was it, like all of volume 8 to 10 was like sprinkled with chapters of Sylphie wondering if she's not big enough. And I think even beyond that, she still talks about it. And yes, Roxy does that too. Roxy, ever since falling in love with Rudius, has constantly been thinking about that. It's just, unfortunately, their insecurity. In any case, was it just him, or did Zenith notice Lucy was ready to feed? Maybe she picked up some sort of sixth sense from raising 3 children. Probably. It was probably noon at that point. He managed to spend the entire morning with Lucy, which was time well spent. There was nothing more important than spending time with her kid. Well, there's a lot of things, but yeah, nothing more important than that. He headed to his study, a small room on the first floor. Inside was a desk covered in handwritten reports and a few magic stones. Aside from spending time with his sisters and daughter, he had been spending time studying his prizes from the Beggar continent. It was these light green scales that lent the Hydra the ability to shrug off his spells, forcing them into dangerous close-range combat, absorbing magic it came in contact with. He learned a few things from the library at the university. Usually referred to as stones of absorption, Manatite Hydras produce them naturally from within their bodies, which I thought was kind of interesting. This idea that they kind of just keep producing it. Which, yes, technically, 2 scales and teeth and whatnot, that's something that's obviously constantly being growing. Since they had gone extinct thousands of years ago, when the legendary hero Golden Knight Aldebaran sundered the continent. Yes, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. A few Mushoku Mondays ago, it was like I just slipped out that Millis did it. Millis did make the highway, but yes, it was Aldebaran that, yeah, anyways. They were now incredibly rare and valuable. Many dragons produced magic stones and crystals from within their body. The stones from his staff was from a dragon species of sea serpent. Which again, this is kind of that interesting aspect of them talking about these stones just kind of building up inside their bodies, which again is technically different than the idea of it producing scales from it. So that makes me wonder the idea that in most cases it's just these stones are within their body, and so when they slay these dragons they can open it up and pull these stones out, or is that just like, do they all kind of produce it into their scales? I don't think that's an aspect of their scales itself. I think the Hydra is probably unique in that aspect. The effects of these stones varied widely. Many had direct magical applications of some sort. Some increased magical capacity, some reduced the amount of mana it took to cast spells, others made spells twice as powerful without increasing the cost. It was a surprise one absorbed magic entirely. Yeah, it does kind of seem like counter to everything else. Like all the other ones is amplifying, it's reducing cost. It's essentially taking mana that you're giving it and making some sort of beneficial effect. This is the rare case. If you put this stone on a staff and you go to use it, it's like, it's just going to drain you. It doesn't make any sense. The tricky part was trying to figure out how it was doing that. Just sitting on a desk, it didn't actively suck the mana from everything around it, which was kind of curious to find out. Something clearly had to happen first. Soon, Rudius realized that the stone had a front and a back. While hard to tell, it definitely existed. Feeding mana into one specific side, it would absorb while emitting a high-pitched whine, exactly like he was experiencing when they were fighting the Hydra. Every time a spell went to go hit the Hydra, they heard this high-pitched sound, meaning they weren't automatic. You had to turn them on and off, similar to suction pads on an octopus. The Hydra, this is the interesting thing, this is scary. The Hydra was activating armor as the spells were flying. It was hard to imagine that people could react that quickly, but wild animals can often have better dynamic, vision, and reflexes. So yeah, he's pretty much implying this idea that as they were fighting this Hydra, he's sitting here trying to, swipe Paul and Elise away because they're in the melee range, like, get out of my way. And then suddenly this fireball comes towards them, and it's like, activate, absorb. And then a stone comes from above, activate, absorb. Like, that is crazy to think about. Not only the quick reflexes, but the idea of that essentially full-on 360 vision, or at least sensing something is nearby. He also realized it didn't absorb magic how he expected. While holding the stone in one hand and casting with the other, the spell would disappear, but Rudius didn't regain the mana that was spent. So he's activating the stone with one hand, he's casting a spell with the other, but he's not getting that mana back. In fact, he's pretty sure it was costing some mana, the same amount used to create the spell. He'd have to experiment more to be sure what it meant. But his hypothesis was that the stone was converting the mana that he fed into waves that could instantly disintegrate anything else made of mana. The results were similar to disturbed magic. But it felt like the stones were more thorough at obliterating the spell that they interacted with. Which, yes, this kind of makes me believe that, like, with the whole situation with disturbed magic, it was almost like it was affecting the mana flow. Whereas this feels like, the way he's explaining it, it's more like the idea that it's creating a spell to obliterate. It just wants to destroy anything that's coming at it, rather than the spell coming to it, converting back to the mana, and then being absorbed into it, which he initially thought it was. There was still things that this theory didn't explain, though. For example, the figurines that he made with magic were unaffected by it, which is, yes, that technically is very interesting. Despite the fact that his stone cannon was affected by it. Maybe it was because the mana from his figurines were more stabilized over time. Which is, I guess, that technically makes sense. Like, if he creates a stone cannon, it's a still forming aspect of mana turning into earth, and then he's shooting it. Whereas the figurines, he's, yes, creating earth with his mana, but over time, that's sort of solidified as, like, the mana itself has removed itself. That's, I guess, the best way to explain it. With a stone cannon, it still has the presence of mana within it, even though it is earth. But with a figurine, over time, that mana that was built in it has kind of drifted away. And now all it is earth. There was no point in going down rabbit holes, though. He didn't even have a good grasp of what mana really was. No, Rudius, keep going down this rabbit hole. I love this stuff. I hate whenever I get into this stuff and then Rudius walks away from it. Every damn time, he gets a little... Fujin's like, I'm gonna give you a little bit. Now Rudius is gonna get sidetracked. No! Rather than looking for an explanation, he wanted to focus on how he could use them. And how, as per usual, Rudius 101 right here, and how to counteract them in the future. Same thing with every single one of them. Disturbed magic, everything, it's always, if I can't figure it out, I at least want to know how to counter it, so it doesn't happen again. His focus was to see if the stones could destroy things disturbed magic couldn't, like magic circles, for example. Cliff helped him out with this, and as he'd hoped, he destroyed both the barrier spell and the magic circle he used to cast it. Very interesting. The design of the original scroll wasn't affected though, but as long as the spell was active and in use, the stones could erase the circle itself. They weren't, however, able to affect this magic circle from inside a magical implement, maybe because it was carved into the implement itself, rather than drawn on the surface. Which, yes, that technically makes sense, like he points out here, that makes sense because otherwise, during the battle, when the Hydra was flashing around, it would have messed up the magic circle, and they wouldn't have been able to teleport. In any case, these scales couldn't destroy everything of magic nature. With one of these in his back pocket, he could break himself the next time he fell into a trap. Ideally, he wanted to avoid falling into them to begin with, but it was a good insurance policy. He's always thinking about the pack situation. He's always thinking about that pack situation. Pack's living in his mind rent-free for this many years. He was actually thinking about incorporating one of them into the palm of his prosthetic hand. It might be tricky both activating the stone and casting, but hopefully he can get the hang of it with practice. He's gonna have like this like Iron Man hand, but not shooting anyways. While studying, Aisha popped in. She was in professional maid mode to announce the visitor. It was Zenoba, and he was waiting in the living room. Reese was wondering why he would visit. He was assuming that he just wanted company. Zenoba had been making progress in his research into the automaton, his prosthesis being a product of those efforts. It seemed the automaton's legs and feet worked similar to the arms and hands, and Reese was helping out making prototypes this time. Zenoba would drop the plans, Reese would create the model with magic, and Cliff inscribe the magic circles. That's kind of interesting though, because like, as they kind of explain it, is that like it's a layer of onions, and under every single layer is more magic circles. So yes, technically Reese could create like the bone structure or whatever, then Cliff can inscribe the magic circles, and then Rudius can basically create another layer on top of that with magic, and then he could inscribe it. It would actually work out really well. It took nearly a month to make a single leg. This is going to take a while. They better sell these automatons for a lot of money. Someday they can hopefully sell them alongside artificial hands, but they were still far from mass producing them. This is going to be another project for the Julie Smile Company. With the limbs out of the way, Zenoba was investing time on the body. This involved locating the fine seams between each section, then carefully cutting them apart to study the innards. This sounds tedious as hell, by the way. Inside the center of the chest, they found a magic stone. A pretty red crystalline thing of an unusual size. Upon studying it, Zenoba realized it wasn't a single stone. This is interesting. It was rather a combination of numerous smaller ones, each covered in tiny magic circles. That really does make me wonder, like, what was the intent there? Is the intent that they have to have different types of stones? They're all red, you would assume, because it's one big red stone. But why would it have to be multiples? Were they only able to find small stones, and so they were just kind of making this prototype to throw together? Because it seems like there's more tasks to be done in order for it to actually become like that. Because it almost implies this idea that there was all these sketches on it that made it come together. Now, the sketches could be for something else, but maybe those sketches were to make it one solid core. Or possibility that, yes, despite them being the same color, maybe each of these stones is does different things. Like Rudius mentioned earlier with the magic stones that he has from the Hydra. It does different things. Maybe there's a stone that increases strength, there's a stone that reduces mana costs and all that kind of stuff just to make it the most efficient. But yeah, to add more complexity, now we have a core, and oh, by the way, the core has a bunch of inscriptions on it. It's crazy. Unfortunately, Zenoba was struggling with this new challenge. The circles were unbelievably strange and complex. Additionally, the patterns were full of scratches and ancient writings, notes, warnings, passages from obscure books, and preliminary scratched out designs. Basically, it was clear that the creator has still been perfecting the design as it was being built. Yeah, basically, like, he's working on this and going, yeah, that's not it. All right. No, that's not it. It's going to be more like this. Which, yeah, if you're trying to duplicate it, that's going to make it more difficult. Because it's not just words. This is, again, designs and everything. So you don't know what scratched out might actually be needed there. It seemed that the masterpiece that they had found was, in fact, a failure or prototype. There was no telling what its creator was actually going for. Making sense of that was the biggest challenge. But Zenoba was undaunted. He seemed determined to carry out his life's mission. This is a life mission. And Rudius was moral support. Like, this is a big deal to Zenoba. This is something that he so badly wants. Hey, Zenoba, sorry to keep you waiting. He jumped up from the sofa. Oh, Master Rudius, my apologies for intruding like this. Julie and Ginger, standing in the corner, lowered their heads slightly. So, what can I do for you today? I was simply in the neighborhood, so I thought I would drop by and say hello. Well, make yourself at home. This was unusual behavior for Zenoba. As Rudius sat, Julie walked up to him. Look, Grandmaster Rudius, I finished another one. Nice work. You're improving quickly. Keep churning them out for me, okay? Okay. She gave a cheerful bow. While he was doing his journey, Julie had finished her original reserved figure. He was surprised how it looked, and he honestly liked hers more. The stance was perfect. Even a total amateur was going to realize that he was a badass. Even Norn, upon seeing it, murmured, I want one under her breath. Rudius ended up giving her the original one as a present. I could totally see that. Norn sees it and goes, I want it. Give it to me, please. It's cute though, because he murmured it. She did like, give it to me now. It was more like, I want one. It's cute. Everybody loves Reserved. If you meet Reserved, you're gonna love Reserved. One of these days, Julie has to meet Reserved. With Julie's success, he tasked her with making more. It took her a while, but it was a good way for her to build her mana capacity. And they would end up having a nice pile to sell with Norn's books. Yesterday I saw Miss Norn at school. Oh yeah? You bumped into each other? Did she say anything? She thanked me, so I thanked her too. Ah, that's nice. Good for you, Julie. He patted Julie on the head affectionately. She stiffened up a little bit, but she didn't flinch away. She doesn't hate this. She's not totally afraid of him anymore, which is a good thing, but that's super cute. I totally want to see like some segments with Norn and Julie because they're basically making this whole thing happen. So Norn has joined Julie's Smile Factory, so she's got to be a part of it. They got to be best as friends. And honestly, putting the cuteness and jokes aside, I think that'd be a really good thing for Julie to have a friend that speaks, human tongue. Yes, she has Zenoba, but she has to speak formally to him. She needs somebody that she can be comfortable with in order to help her language. And yes, help her have some sort of a childhood. I mean, there is an element here that comes from this whole aspect of forced servitude in any case, any world. Is this idea that, yes, you don't want it to exist. Nobody wants it to exist unless you profit from it and you're a disgusting human being. But there is an element here that, yes, Julie is probably way better off now that she's with Zenoba. Before, she was literally dying. They didn't want to cure her. They were just going to let her die. But even acknowledging the fact that she's still technically a servant in this world and that she should do as Zenoba says, you still want her to have a childhood. You still hope that she can have some great moments and some fun. And yeah, she's probably, through forced brainwashing through Zenoba, she probably enjoys what she's doing, but there's still other things I would like to see her do. And yes, having a friend would be a good one. Norn had finished her book about Reserved. Even after she started learning Sword from Rudius, she kept writing. The book was short, it was a little clumsy and awkward. It only covered one part of Reserve's life, beginning with Reserve's loyal service to his lord and ending with his revenge. So pretty much just covering up to that point, but not necessarily everything after it. His journey to try to improve his name and all that other kind of stuff. So pretty much following his legacy to the point which everybody believes that he's terrible. But again, most people don't know about the fact that he went and killed the one that gave him the spears that caused the whole disaster. This evil person that everybody, besides people on the Demon Continent, hates, which is something that a lot of people have never heard, and it might improve his image. Even with its flaws, she managed to capture Reserve's pride, grief, and boldness. With careful editing, Rudius was confident that it could sell as a children's book. In order to test that theory, he read it to Julie, who loved it. He's reading stories to her, at least she's getting that. She made him read it 3 times in a row. Probably would have kept going if Ginger didn't intervene. Dang it, Ginger, can't let her have fun. It seemed that nobody had read Julie's stories like that when she was little. Perhaps a cultural thing. Dwarves apparently had traditional fairy tales of some kind, because yes, the whole bag thing, that the reason why she was terrified for a long time. But he figured maybe they didn't write books for children. Or maybe her parents just were too busy to spend time to entertain her. Not that it mattered either way. Since Julie enjoyed the book, he planned to introduce her to Norn. But it seems like they met already. Norn was probably embarrassed to learn that she already made a fan. It was nice to hear that they got off on the right foot, though. Recognizing each other's talents is a good step to a good working relationship. We're already thinking like, he's thinking like a manager of a company. He's like, yes, good. My employees are getting along well. They're going to be working along together for a long time, so they might as well get along together. You know, have to have those after work drinking parties before they go back to work again. He's already making a black company in another world. The superb PR campaign was making good progress. With training and research going well, he felt good about how he was using his time. Any more than this on his plate would probably overload himself. This is totally a flag, Rudy. That's totally a flag. Shut up. You're going to add something else to it now. He thought it might be optimal to focus on a single specific area in which to specialize. But his feeling was that he was never going to be best at anything that he tried. That was true in his last life, and probably in this one as well. Wow. We're still hindering ourselves from our previous life. Rudius is still holding on to that stuff. That's a surprise. Because yes, it's the first time he's really kind of bringing that up as sort of a stain from his previous life. He's still holding on to it. There was always someone out there better than you. Maybe he was the best mage at the university now, but the world was full of unbelievably powerful people. Orsted. He's still thinking about Orsted. And yes, technically Reserved and Bodygotti. There's a whole bunch of people. There was such a thing as genuine talent, the kind that you can't compete with. Not that he needed to push himself to be the best at one thing. His goal was to be flexible enough to compete in multiple fronts. If he couldn't beat someone one-on-one, he'd just find a way to slip around them. Which that's something that he pretty much established after Orsted. That was something that he pretty much instilled himself then. I'm just going to figure out a way to get us away. His whole idea was I need to protect Edis, and I wasn't able to protect her. So I'm going to get more stronger now so that I can get her away from there. It was good in theory, but sometimes you found yourself facing a Manatite Hydra. He wanted to be powerful enough to defend his family, if nothing else. While fighting wasn't his specialty, he had to find ways to get stronger. He's got a family to protect now. Oh right, Zenoba, did you want to take a look at Lucy?
Oh, you're willing to show me your daughter? Are you sure?
I mean, yeah. Is there a reason why I wouldn't?
I suppose not. However, I believe there are certain countries out there where it's traditional to wait until a child turns 5 before letting anyone outside the family see them.
Really? Huh. I'd rather show her off to everyone I can personally. Again, this is just the same as the whole situation with Zenith. It's like, ooh, you can truly see how Rudius trusts Zenoba. Again, Zenoba is the type that if he doesn't control his strength, just touching that child will kill it. He did that with his brother, but yet Rudius is willing to let Zenoba see Lucy. Now, he says, see, show her. He doesn't say, hold her, which that's probably a thing, and I'm sure that Zenoba knows that. Like, I don't think that Zenoba would want to touch it, unless it's like, it's so cute, and I guess I have to touch it. Again, an uncomfortable truth. Rudius didn't need to think on that hard right now. He just wanted to keep moving forward, slowly and steadily. He was keeping up his routine, learning, training, researching, and making lots of friends. Compared to his last try-it life, he had put a lot more effort, and was getting a lot more out of every day. It was fair to say that he was doing a good job so far. By his standards, at least. Yeah, it's like, let's set that bar way low. I'm doing better. It's good, though. There was no need to rush things. If he pushed himself too hard, he'd end up breaking physically or mentally. Haste might make him careless, too. He didn't want to blunder into another disaster. Flag. Like he did with the Hydra. he'd move at his own pace, one step at a time. He decided that he'd make efforts into self-improvements a part of his daily routine. Hopefully that effort would pay off the next time he faced a real challenge. But what was that next step? With everything going well, maybe it was time he'd have Roxy teach him King Tier water magic. Let's go, boys. He's finally going to step up. Legend of the University number 5. The boss has a soft spot for little kids. That one's another easy one. Again, I don't know the eye thing, but that one's another easy one. Super good chapter. Super good chapter. Some nice reflections on Paul with the whole aspects of what it's like to be a father. More Zen stuff to give me more hope that she's getting better, and I love it. And then, yes, this little segment to see that Julie and Zenoba are kind of moving things forward. But this last segment is kind of telling this idea that he wants to make this concerted effort to slowly improve himself. Now, at first, I thought it was aspect of self-improvement, thus, like, mentally and emotionally. But it seems like it's about magic. But I do think that's a good thing. As he's got these motions going, he's limiting himself to make sure he doesn't break himself, because he technically could overwork himself. He could put so much on his plate that he's going to end up being mentally broken by it. Like, so much stress is going to get to him, and he has to carry it all because he doesn't want to let people down. He's gotten to the point where he's got so many friends compared to his previous life where he had literally nothing, that he doesn't know how to limit himself. He's got to learn how to limit himself. He's got so many friends now. They're all close to him, and he wants to spend time and help all of them, that eventually he's not going to be able to carry all that. So I am wondering if that might actually turn into being a story beat. So we'll have to wait to see on that one. But I do like the idea of self-limiting. Don't push yourself too far. He's actively telling himself, don't push myself so far. He could be flagging himself. He could be actively doing it. But also, since things are settled, since I have some structure now, which does flag me for something bad happening soon, I want to steadily improve myself. I can finally give some focus to improving myself, which he hasn't really been doing at all. And again, when he went to the labyrinth, what was the thing that was constantly in his head? I got comfortable. All I did was stone cannon, stone cannon, stone cannon. Look at Roxy over here. She's doing multiple things. She's combining things. She's doing incredible stuff because she used to solo this stuff. And it made him go, crap, I haven't been improving myself. Now, he's finally taken that step. I want to improve myself. Finally, he wants to learn new magic. He wants to go further. Which, yes, technically with like the earth and all that kind of stuff, he was like saying, look, doesn't have practical use. We'll find out. Seems like this one has practical use. And it opens up a lot of cool doors. Can I do another chapter? Gee-miny criminy. We'll try. Holy crap. Chapter 6, A Water King is Born. I want to do this. This is such a goofy segment. In front of the PE storage shed, a young man sees a blue-haired girl by the arm. Come on, what's the big deal? I'm begging you here, Teach. No means no. Her face was turned to the side, pouting in displeasure. Just one time, please. I've already given you an answer. Please let go of me, please. Lunch is ending soon. Hey, don't be like that. She looked around the area, troubled. When she saw nearby onlookers with pleading glances, they simply looked away. There was a reason. Everyone was afraid of the young man harassing her. He was the most infamous delinquent in the entire city. Think it over for a minute, okay? This is a win-win arrangement we're talking about. You might not like the idea now, but in the long run, we're both gonna benefit. Well, I suppose yes. Hey, how about it? If you do this for me, I'll do anything you want in return. Look, As she faltered, he whispered honeyed words in her ears. Her face grew redder by the moment, fiddling with her braided hair, looking down with embarrassment. Hey, look, it's the student council! Luke and Silent Fitz were here, and people were captivated by their looks, some noting Fitz getting cuter and being shocked that she was a girl. They approached the young man and girl. Hey, Rudius, we're here because someone reported you assaulting a female student, but... Luke trailed off mid-sentence, gave a heavy sigh, and walked away, realizing it was Rudius and his second wife, Roxy. Fitz, you deal with this, please. Scratching her ears awkwardly, Fitz nodded. Right. Roxy gave off a sigh. A female student? Really? You can't blame him, teacher. Most of the students aren't even aware that you're a professor yet. Rudius looked to Sylphie for support, who seemed displeased. Huh? What's the matter, Sylphie? Look, Rudy, I know Roxy's your wife, but that doesn't mean you could force her to do something that she doesn't want to do. Sometimes a girl just isn't in the mood, you know. Huh? Right, absolutely. Honestly, maybe she's better at this stuff, but you could try asking me instead. Wait, hold on. Could this be? His eyes lit up. Quickly stepping towards Fitz, he poked her cheek. She responded, turning her head, puffing her cheeks further. It is! You're jealous, Sylphie! He threw his arms around her, squeezing her. She didn't stop scowling, but she didn't seem entirely displeased. I won't say I'm jealous, really. I'm more like I'm disappointed. Don't worry, honey. I won't leave you out. We'll do it together. What? Are you serious? You mean all three of us? He whispered in her ears. Yeah, that's right. We can have Roxy teach both of us at once. Roxy is gonna teach us? Well, of course she is. She's the expert after all. Fitz glanced over at Roxy, who turned her face to the side sulkily. I still didn't say I'm willing, you know. Come on, don't say that. Sylphie wants to learn too. Isn't that right, Sylphie? I don't know. It sounds kind of embarrassing. Fitz squirmed around uncertainly. But I guess I'll do it for you, Rudy. Oh, Sylphie. He buried his face in her hair, the hug growing more intense by the second. Fitz was entranced by the embrace, soon stopping resisting entirely. Roxy looked on in envy, which was exactly what Rudius needed. He pressed the attack. Why don't you teach me, Roxy? Don't you like me anymore? Of course I still like you, Rudy. I love you very much. Then why are you being like this? Well, if I teach you this, I won't have anything left that I'm better at than you. What? Don't be ridiculous, Roxy. You're on a higher plane of existence than me. Okay, look, I've been meaning to say this for a while, but I think your opinion of me is a little overblown. I'm a petty person. Really. The sort of woman that gets upset about her student surpassing her. That's not a problem, I assure you. You're perfect the way you are. Pettiness and all. Anyway, I spent months of my life learning this, you know? And you and Sylphie are more talented than I ever was. So you'll probably master it much more quickly. Fitz finally realized that she misunderstood the situation. Her dreamy smile gave way to confusion. Sorry, Rudy, what exactly are we talking about here? Oh, right. I was asking Roxy to teach me King Tier water spell. Wap, 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 wap. I just got a huge kick out of that whole segment. I was laughing so much. I read it like 3 times, and I'm like, I kind of want to play this out and just not even talk the entire time. It's a dumb misunderstanding segment, but I just love the... My gosh! Seeing Fitz, seeing Sylphie in a goofy situation with Rudius. Like, the chemistry, like I said before, Roxy being here has added so much goofy chemistry. And I think a lot of that has to do with, like, early on with Fitz, Rudius just super, like, massively admired Master Fitz. And so I didn't really get much fun moments in that earlier segments of her being reunited with Rudius. And I really wasn't getting too much after that as well. Sylphie was just so submissive, and she was so soft-spoken, and she didn't really speak her mind much. Now it's like, for some reason, we're just getting super shenanigans. Let's get Sylphie in here, let's have some fun. And I love it. I love just this change of nature of Rudius himself, and just the injection of chemistry here. And maybe it's more an aspect of Sylphie finally opening up, which give it to me. Give me Sylphie opening up. I love it. We then cut to Rudius hugging Sylphie from behind, the nape of her neck in front of him. He was keeping his lower body separate from her, for reasons that didn't need to be stated. She was his wife, but he needed to treat her with respect. There was also stories in his previous life of car crashes caused by passioners groping drivers. They were on a horse at the moment, but it still wasn't good to distract the one holding the reins. You were technically recharging Ponzi's for an entire trip. He wasn't getting gropey, though. Matsukaze is a good horse. Seated in front of Sylphie was Roxy. Yep, you don't see many horses like this every day, that's for sure. The 3 of them squeezed on the back of a horse. Matsukaze, their most neglected household pet. Poor Matsukaze. They just need to get a ranch or something. Matsukaze didn't seem to mind the burden one bit. It's a beefy horse. Sylphie continued. Didn't Ginger pick this out for you, Rudy? She got a good eye for horses. Do you know a lot about horses yourself, Sylphie? Huh? Oh, I wouldn't go that far, but I did see the best horses at the Kingdom of Ashura a couple times. Like the one the captain of the Royal Knights rides. I see. I'm sure it must be a splendid animal. At this, Matsukaze waned in an objection. The horse was like, dude, really? I'll be talking about the horses right now. Oh, right. Sorry, Matsukaze. You're quite splendid, too. After all, you're the one and only steed of the Greyat family. Ruth thought, did certain animals understand human language, or was Roxy a horse whisperer? Probably not. Pets just responded to your voice when you talked to them enough. In any case, I have to admit, it's a bit embarrassing to ride in the front at my age. Roxy would blush and pull her hat in front of her face whenever they passed by people. Riding in the front was comparable to riding in the baby seat in a car. She continued, I wouldn't have minded following you on Dillo or something, you know? Sylphie responded, nice try, Roxy. I bet you were planning on running off the instant we took our eyes off of you. I'm not a child. I wasn't going to run away. They were at the outskirts of the city, with a river on the right and plains and a forest on the left. This time of the year seen lots of green. They'd been riding for some time, but they'd come far enough for some privacy. Seeing the fish in the river, he felt it'd be nice to catch some fish, even though he hadn't done it before. I told you to I was going to teach you, and I intend to do a proper job of it. Roxy had ended up folding. His repeated pleas and badgering had worn her down. I'll teach you the only king tier water spell I've mastered, Lightning Storm. She sounded disappointed. So he reached past Sylphie's side and stroked her shoulders affectionately. Based on the name, Reese kind of just figured that Lightning Storm was a standard electricity-based spell. But lightning wasn't a standard magical discipline in this world. He'd never seen anyone use electric-type spell before. On top of that, it was king tier. He assumed it was going to be dramatic. What's kind of interesting here is the admittance that yes, technically there isn't a school of lessons and magic that is electric. And yes, that technically could mean to the idea that in order to produce lightning, at least, you're going to have to produce clouds and bring that atmosphere together and create that friction. But yes, I haven't really thought too much about this idea that what if there is other schools of magic? What we got into when we got into the magic circles and everything is this idea of lost magic, lost arts of the past. This was what Nanahoshi was doing a bunch of research into. She was trying to find all these old information to figure out if there was a spell to summon or teleport back to her old world. So what's to say that there isn't a lost art of using electric spells without, using water spells and creating clouds and everything? It's an interesting thought. Roxy spoke up. Okay, I think we've come far enough. Roxy called Matsukaze to halt and hop down. After tying Matsukaze to a tree, Rudius spoke up. Oh, he's such a jerk. He's such a jerk. Hey, teacher, do you remember Caravaggio? Ah, yes, that's the name of Paul's horse, wasn't it? That really brings me back. Roxy smiled, looking a bit nostalgic. The one that you nearly killed. The one that you nearly killed. It had been 12 years since he helped Rudius become a water saint. He picked up many skills since then, but only now was finally moving up to king tier. It felt like he had taken a lot of detours on that road to this moment. But on the topic of horse, poor Caravaggio nearly died back then. Roxy just managed to save its life. It was possible that she had forgotten about it all this time, so he felt like he wanted to bring it up. Is there a risk that we'll have another accident like that again? I don't think so, no. But we wouldn't want Matsukaze catching a cold, so you should make an earth fortress to shelter him. Got it. He promptly enclosed the horse into an earthen igloo. I have to admit it's time here. Despite me earlier talking about the fact that I'm liking this improvement of the chemistry of these characters, I like finally seeing some goofy shenanigans around Sylphie that just seems to work for me personally. I know that there's probably lots of stuff in like Volume 10 or Volume 11 that everybody's like, oh my gosh, you didn't like this part? It was super funny. I just really haven't got too much out of Sylphie. She's always been so quiet. And now we're finally getting these goofy little moments with Rudius and her and Roxy. I love this new chemistry. Even still, I have to admit that I'm a little bit disappointed at there was a massive potential here. We're still technically getting this, but man, missed opportunity right here. Refugio should have totally banked on this moment as being this massive nostalgia trip. This is literally Roxy, once again, taking Rudius out, just like she did way back in Buena Village. They're both on the horse together, riding down the street, passing by people, going out in the middle of nowhere, casting this big, massive spell to teach him the next rank up in his abilities. He even said it himself, I took a detour. She brought me out there for this test. I succeeded, became Saint Tier, and then I stopped. I never learned beyond then. And now finally, years later, once again, riding horseback, out in the middle of nowhere, setting up the horse, tying it down, talking about the good old days. She's going to cast a spell. He's going to cast it too. And he's going to rank up, just like before. It's super nostalgic. The reason why this hits me so hard is because that whole scene, the scene with Roxy taking Rudius out into the village and then out into the boonies to do his test, that still cements itself in my mind as one of the greatest moments of the story ever. Even though it's way back in Volume 1, that is one of the most emotional moments for me. That's why when, was it episode 1 of the second season? When Rudeus goes back to his room, and it has that shot where Roxy's, horseback with him going through the village. It gets me so emotional because I just know how impactful that first step was for Rudeus. And so many times throughout the story, he thinks back to that one big step. I left my house, and that meant everything to him. But despite all that, despite my disappointment that this is a missed opportunity, Refugien still nails this scene. Because so much comes out of this scene. In the end, despite me being right here, I'm kind of disappointed this was a missed opportunity. As it goes on, the later segment of this, the ride back basically, was so good. Was so good. Like to the point where any thought that I have personally of this friction around Roxy and Rudeus and Sylphie being this harem basically is gone. Because it kind of opens the door of what Sylphie's thinking. What Roxy's thinking. Rudeus doesn't really speak up. It's what Sylphie and Roxy think about this relationship and what it means to them. Their insecurities and, yes, their acceptance of it. And not only that, but posing the question mark in the end of what ifs. What if Roxy didn't save me back then? What if I never met Sylphie? What if this never happened? What if this didn't happen? The butterfly effect. It's essentially Refugien exploring the concept of the butterfly effect. What if this didn't happen? None of this ever would have happened. I would have never met them. Maybe fate would have brought us together later on, but it would have been different. So in the end, despite me being a little bit disappointed that this was a missed opportunity to just nail that nostalgia, in the end, I absolutely loved the ride back. After checking to make sure everybody was ready, Roxy pointed at a large tree with a thick trunk. I'll be using that tree as my target. I can only use this once today, so watch carefully. It's literally just like last time. I can only do it once, so you better pay attention. Roxy nodded again before closing her eyes and breathing deeply. Her hands clutched her staff tightly and focused intently. It was taking longer than expected. She could fire off a Saint-Tier spell quickly, but apparently this wasn't so easy for her. Rudeus felt confident that she was using the time to gather a huge amount of mana. After a few long minutes, she snapped her eyes open and murmured, "All right, then let's begin." She stabbed her staff into the ground, holding it steadily with her left hand. Her right hand clutched the stone on the top. She spoke slowly and carefully, as if reviewing every word as she spoke it. Again, this is that aspect of she has to make sure that she does this perfectly. Otherwise, buy mana. "O spirits of the magnificent waters, I beseech the Prince of Thunder, grant me my wish, bless me with thy savagery, and reveal to this insignificant servant a glimpse of thy power. Let fear strike the heart of man as thy divine hammer strikes its anvil and covers the land with water." A few seconds in, Rudeus recognized the words and blinked in confusion. "Come, O rain, and wash everything away, thy flood of destruction." Black clouds rapidly filled the skies. Simultaneously, a harsh and pelting rain began to fall. Wind whipped across the plain, driving the water up, soaking Rudeus's robes instantly. Lightning flickered above them, threatening to strike the ground at any moment. It was impressive, but he had seen it before. This was just the Saint-Tier spell, Cumulonimbus. But then, she kept going. "I call upon you, mighty spirit of light, shining lord of the heavens. Do you see the impotent foe before us? Do you see your sworn enemy? In all his arrogance, I would be the holy blade that strikes him down. Let your radiant's power teach him that the Empress yet reigns supreme." With every word, the sky above them compressed. Black clouds stretching across the horizon collapsed on themselves, forming a circle. They drew smaller, denser by the second. Crackling electricity arced all around the dark mass. And finally, when the ring of cloud has sunk to a mere dot in the sky, lightning! A pillar of pure light fell on the earth. A bolt of lightning, but nothing like he had ever seen before. A sound wave reached them a split second later. A roar that was deafening, even at this range. Sylphie clapped her hands on her ears and grimaced. Rudeus was just staring, slack-jawed, into the distance. He had no words. Finally, he managed to swallow, and clutched his hand into a fist. They were trembling. Once the roar swept past, nothing remained. The jet-black clouds were gone. The rain was gone. The blinding pillar of light was gone. The massive tree was gone too. The ground was wet around them, but no other hint of what transpired remained. I like this. We don't really get much of Rudeus using spells or them kind of explaining spells because, there's not a lot of actions happening in this series. Despite the fact this is an adventure fantasy show, it's not like every 2 seconds Rudeus is casting a spell and he's having to explain what's happening. But every now and then, Whenever Refugio explains what's happening, does it so well. Like, just reading the segment, I'm like, holy crap, this seems amazing. Again, this the farthest stretches of all these clouds. They're in the middle of nowhere. And these clouds are stretching out into the horizon. And they all come zooming in together. And this little dot up there. And then slam. This loud, impactful noise. You can imagine all these clouds just crushing into one spot and creating all this friction that eventually creates this large, gigantic lightning. And then at the end of it, everything disperses. And there's nothing that remains. Just the wet ground. Nothing remains. It's super awe-inspiring. Such a great way of explaining this. And really selling to me the fact that this is a king tier level spell. This was epic. I like the fact that he's sort of seeing something actually valuable in this. This isn't just a massive spell that's going to be a waste of mana. And again, explain the fact that it takes so long to use it. Different for him, but massive. And I love how he figures out how to use it in different ways, which we'll get into in a minute. Straining his eyes, he could see a black clump of carbonized wood where the tree stood. Roxy released her grip on her staff before staggering to one side. He hurried to catch her before she could fall. Drained. Out of mana. Are you alright? Oh, I'm glad I pulled it off. With my mana capacity, I could only use it once, even with my staff. Did you get a good look at the spell, Rudy? Absolutely, teacher. He wasn't able to tear his eyes away for a second. He remembered every word, too. Do you think you're ready to try it? I'll give it a shot. That was an interesting aspect. The fact that she had to use the stone, too, that's why she grabbed it. She had to use what was in there as well. Like, she couldn't just do it on her own capacity. This is a massive, massive amount of mana. A massive amount, because Roxy has a big pool, too. Handing Roxy over to Sylphie, he turned and held out his staff. Aqua Hartia, who had been with him ever since he turned 10, supporting him through a turbulent life. He felt confident that he could cast it without the staff's help, but he used it anyways. It's a dangerous thing because it amplifies him. Pretty interesting comment to make, though. The staff that was given to him by Edis is this thing that has been at his side this whole time. Finishing the cumulonimbus segment, he knew if he called out the word, it would complete itself. If he did that, it would be impossible to achieve the compression of the clouds. He moved on to the second part, which again, this is kind of the cool thing that was in that whole thing that he was noting. This is another spell that just kind of continues. I like that aspect. He moved on to the second part. With every phrase, the magic in the air raged more and more intensely. He had no choice but to continue to pour more mana into the spell to keep it from spinning out of control. He was forcing the clouds to compress, squeezing them together with all of his might. The spell demanded power. Raw, brute power. He'd never casted anything that demanded such a ferocious force before. No, that wasn't entirely true. Something about this felt familiar to him. It wasn't so different from what he felt when he was pushing a stone cannon to the very limits of its potential. That thought made it suddenly easier to control. Lightning. Speaking the final word, he felt something like an empty hole open up underneath his compressed ball of mana. He pushed everything down through it. All at once. A great pillar of light hit the earth. A roar swept past them. Without a particular target, the spell struck the ground where he wanted it to. Once again, nothing left in its wake. No clouds, but the ground more sodden than before, and that their coats were dripping wet. The afterimage of the lightning was still flashing in his eyes, and his ears were ringing. He pulled it off. Sylphie gave out a, "Oh wow." Just like that, he was a king tier water mage. Finally advancing. Finally my boy is advancing. It does feel so rewarding. Like, Rudius is legit, even to his own admittance, has not been progressing, has not been advancing. And yes, a lot of that is because he just didn't see any sort of purpose to it. This stuff just seems like it's too grandiose. It doesn't have any practical use. And yes, for a lot of mages, it's a drain. Like, this is something that a random soldier would use to take down a fortress while everybody else is fighting. This isn't something like you're going to use when you're venturing. But Rudius is different, obviously. And what we do see is that because he's now progressing himself, because he learned this, he's going to have other applications that he can use from it because he's able to do some really weird things with these spells. But yes, finally leveling up. And it does break my heart, though. I do see Roxy's side of this whole thing. It does break my heart, this idea that this was the only thing that made her feel like she was special in Rudius's eyes. This is the only thing that he can't do that I can do. Because she has this massive inferiority complex with him, this is the only thing that she was able to hold on to and say, but at least his master knows something he doesn't. Even though he could do everything else better than me, at least I know something he doesn't. And he's finally taking that from her. And I think that's a good thing for her because she always sees him as a pupil, and this will help her get rid of that last thing that she's holding over him as his master and finally be equal with him. It is technically an equal statement. Like with all these characters, they always feel like they need to be equal with Rudius, and they always feel inferior, even though he's constantly putting them on a pedestal. This might be the thing that finally allows her to go, okay, just let it go. Oh, wait, we're equal now. That's a good thing. I can no longer be standing here telling him stop looking at me like I'm great, because I no longer can hold this thing above him. He's the same rank as me. We are equals. There's so much in there. So much in there. Cutting forward, on the way back, Sylphie's expression was slightly downcast. That was a little frustrating. Roxy started her with Cumulonimbus, which she succeeded with her second try. But after failing Lightning, she was drained and unable to continue. So she pretty much had mana to almost do it 2 times. Almost do Lightning 2 times. Still, she was a quick learner. She'd figure it out after a couple more tries. Don't feel bad, Sylphie. I still mess it up once every 5 times or so. Rudius was a little glad that Sylphie failed. I can see this. It seems mean, but I can see this. If they had both pulled it off their first time, Roxy would have taken a massive hit to her pride. It was interesting to learn that Sylphie seemed to have a larger mana capacity than Roxy, and Roxy's wasn't small from what he understood. Well, somebody succeeded on their first try. You're incredible, Rudy. Roxy followed up. Yes, that was certainly impressive. I have to admit that I was expecting it, but it was a little bit depressing that you were able to pull it off that easy. Rudius couldn't find anything to say to them. Sure, he started magic around the age of 2 and put efforts into expanding his mana capacity, but given how much he ended up with, he'd probably been born with an unnatural supply in the first place. He put in effort, but also got lucky. That made it tricky to say anything about his abilities as a mage. I like this. There is an admittance here that I'm not special. I'm special, but that doesn't make me a great mage. Like, I have this, but that's just luck. But me as a mage is a completely different story. Again, going back to the Labyrinth, despite the fact that he has all this potential, Roxy was out showing him in how she was using what she had. He sees that. He's always been great at sort of humbling himself. Don't get too full of yourself. Always don't get too full of yourself. But it is interesting to once again finally see Rudius going back to that question mark of, did I have a big capacity to begin with? You would assume so because he was doing a lot of practicing before he would just pass out. So the assumption there is that he at least had something to start off with. So I'm curious if, yes, that's gonna start chipping once again at that theory of, was he special to begin with? Was he chosen for that reason? Did Mangod start to poke at him because he's involved and he had a potential? And again, going back to my way back there theory, my crazy theory about the displacement incident was that he was put there because he had a big mana capacity and that he built it up and then he went over here and his mana was what was finally needed to trigger that displacement incident. That he was the trigger that would eventually arrive there. At any rate, he needed to be focused. They weren't home yet, and his wives were exhausted. Once home safe, he would give them a massage. They'd be skipping nocturnal activities as they were worn out. Sylphie called out to Rudius as the sun set in the west. The sky, a brilliant shade of crimson. Nature was beautiful in this world like his last. That was the one thing that hadn't changed. Sylphie sighed before leaning against Rudius slightly. She looked like she was ready to doze off. They make it home before dark, but he needed to stay alert until they reached the city. The two of them couldn't use magic right now, so he'd have to deal with any monsters that popped up. I felt like it was flagging something right here, like something's gonna happen. He keeps mentioning, I gotta keep an eye on things. But it's a good thing. That's his adventurer side coming out. The two of them are drained. I need to make sure that I am aware, so if something comes, I can be ready for it. They are not in a safe place right now. Roxy spoke up. You know, sometimes I find myself wondering if this is all a dream. Sylphie tilted her head quizzically. A dream? That's right. Maybe I'm still trapped in that labyrinth, and this is a happy little delusion I'm seeing before I die. That's a sad thought. I'm a lot happier right now than I was 6 months ago. I got married, for one thing, and I was hired as a professor at the university. I suppose I seem like some sort of interloper to you, Sylphie, but I'm happy I'm here, riding this horse with both of you. Oof, yeah, that's technically true. When she was in the labyrinth, when she was at her wit's end, she hoped that she could get out so she can seek her dreams, which is to be a teacher. And then Rudius showed up, and this was her dream boat. This was the guy that she dreamed of. So everything that she wants, she's getting it right now. All these dreams of hers is coming true. So it's natural for her to feel like, holy crap, this might be a dream. But additionally, this idea that she's happy to be there not just with Rudius, she's happy to be there with Sylphie and Rudius. She's happy right now. It's like I was saying earlier, despite the fact that I wanted this to be, Rudius and Roxy going down memory lane, so much happens here that I love. Because, yes, like I said before, way back when Roxy bedded Rudius, I was conflicted. But then slowly over time, what sort of came to my mind was this aspect of, okay, Roxy really, really loves him and wanted to save him. And yes, technically did indulge. But then Eloise is throwing in all this question mark of, what's so bad about this? Look at it from a different perspective. And then Sylphie accepted it. And it started to make it a lot more easier for me to accept. But there's still the remaining aspect of, what do these two really do think about each other? They haven't really had these moments of talking, at least in the novel series, from Rudius' perspective. This is where we get it. This is where we get the two of them are just, they're now becoming the sister wives, basically. This is where you have it become pretty much Zenith and Lilia, the sister wives. It gets better. Keeps getting better. This is such a good segment. This is such a good segment. You're not an interloper, Roxy, and I'm glad you've been so kind and considerate about all this. I don't think I'd win if you turned it in some sort of competition. Rudius hugs Sylphie, amidst scanning for threats to assure her. She patted his arm in confirmation. It's like a, don't say that. And she's like, it's okay. I mean, I just got lucky, really. I got to know Rudy when we were little, and then I ran into him again when he was really desperate for help. I never would have caught his attention otherwise. Roxy replied, I think you're being a bit too modest. Well, I probably wouldn't be here today if I hadn't met Rudy as a kid. What do you mean? He taught me magic when I was young, It's the only thing that kept me alive. Sylphie went on to recount her story after the displacement incident. She was lucky to emerge above the royal palace in Asura. By quickly casting a spell, she barely managed to land safely. But at that moment, her hair lost its color, possibly a side effect to spending too much mana in terror. There it is. It was so funny. It was like this aspect of when that episode 0, season 2 came out. The people I trust were saying, you probably want to skip that very first segment when she first is falling, because they pretty much reveal something there. And that was her color of her hair changing. Because the question mark, obviously for me, was, did it change because of this displacement incident, or did it change after the displacement incident? Still a question mark up there that could be something still to this whole thing. But right there, this is where they finally revealed that, technically in the novel series. Because, again, when the displacement incident happened, Fitz's chapter, she had white hair. Which, yes, I can see that being the case if this is an aspect of, because they keep kind of explaining the idea that green is like this thing from Laplace. It's this thing, the Superds have it, it's a curse. The green hair is a curse. That's what the man god says. That's the sign of a curse, bestowing upon them that color. So the question mark is, does she get rid of that curse just by using a lot of mana? That doesn't really make much sense to me. Again, I'm still kind of holding this idea is because the displacement incident kind of tore it away, even though they're saying that it technically happened as she was falling. Princess Ariel took a personal liking to her, but her silent casting was what earned her a place in the royal court. Then when Ariel was outmaneuvered by her rivals, the same ability allowed her to fight off dozens of assassins. In the picture she painted, his magic was the only thing that kept her alive. Back when I was working as Princess Ariel's guardian mage, this one thing kept popping in my head. If I didn't know how to use magic, I'd probably be a slave right now. Which is, yes, honestly, sadly, very true. She would have been in prison and probably just sold off. I mean, that stretches even further to the idea of Ariel. Ariel would probably be dead if it weren't for all this stuff. Because even if Sylphie did arrive there, if she would even arrive there, she wouldn't have any magic capability to protect Ariel. And additionally, the boar would have probably just ended up killing her right there without her falling on top of it and killing it. It all is a massive butterfly effect. Rajerd would probably still be in the Demon Continent, thinking his own way of fixing his issue with the Superds and probably never advance. Which just goes to what Orsted originally said. Rudius is this anomaly. Why is Rajerd here? Why is Edis here? This isn't right. Who are you? You're changing too much stuff. I need to get rid of you. As she spoke, Rudius found himself wondering how different his life would be if he hadn't met Roxy or Sylphie when he was young. Without Roxy, he wouldn't have found the courage to leave his house for years. If he never took step outside, he would have never met Sylphie. Could he have survived the displacement incident? Could he have made his way across the Demon Continent? If he never met Sylphie, he wouldn't need to earn money. He wouldn't have met Edis. He wouldn't have met Ghislaine. Maybe his parents would have shipped him off to school eventually. He would have hit a wall with magic at some point, so he might end up asking to be sent off to the University of Magic anyways. Paul may have told him to wait until he was 12, but he wouldn't have found Sylphie waiting for him at Renoa. She wouldn't have followed him there either. Maybe he'd end up in the same class as Lenny and Presena. maybe falling in love with one of them. Then after graduating, heading back to the Great Forest to live with the Beast Folk. But no, the displacement incident would have ended up happening eventually. Again, my theory is it probably never would have because you weren't there. I guess it still could have built up. It's just Rudius gave it that final boost. So he probably would have rushed back to Asura. In any case, his life would have looked completely different. Still, he couldn't help but feel like he would have ran into Sylphie somewhere. And fall in love with her, of course. It was surely predestined. Sylphie continued, my life changed completely that day I met Rudy. I mean, I did put in a lot of effort too, but I think I was lucky more than anything else. So when I see someone like you who changed Rudy's life for the better, and I know that you both love each other, well, I don't really want him to lose that just because I'm around, I guess. I probably don't have the right to object when I just got here first. Sorry, I don't know how to put this. Roxy replied, that's all right. I understand that you're trying to say, and I'm very happy that you have such a high opinion of me. Rudius can see Roxy's shoulders trembling slightly from behind. He pulled them both in for a hug. Back in his world, choosing Roxy meant losing Sylphie. It could be the same here if it's not for Sylphie's decision to forgive him. The one lucky person here was him. Given a track record as his husband, promising them they'd cherish them forever would ring hollow. He'd just have to speak by his actions instead. Yeah, again, yeah, technically makes sense, and you're gonna fail probably. But yeah, there's so much in here. Putting aside the whole butterfly effect that Rudius is giving here, which yes, technically makes sense. Roxy pulled him out of his house. I mean, he was in the yard, but out of his home. Taking him out, showing him the outside. If that never happened, he'd never meet Sylphie. I mean, there could be a chance that at some point Sylphie walks by the yard and he goes, hey, how's it going? You want to hang out in this yard? Who knows? But I mean, she could have probably been bullied to the point where she has to leave, or maybe she unfortunately gets hurt like badly because of the bullying. She might have ended up as a shut-in and never came out of her home. And then maybe at some point way in the future, maybe they'd bump into each other. Maybe Paul would eventually say, dude, you got to get out of the house. You're like 50 years old now. Get out of here, Rudius. Ends up getting kicked out just like Norn and Aisha ends up kicking him out of the house like his brother did. He ends up getting hit by a wagon and then he's set guy back. I mean, there's a lot of possibility there. But yeah, it technically makes sense. Like, even if I didn't leave, the displacement incident still happens. I still get displaced. And at that point, would Rajur be there to save me? Would he have been, again, to the theory that Sylphie had when she was studying the displacement incident, would he have ended up at the same location? If he was standing right next to Paul and Zenith and all of them, he might have ended up somewhere else. Maybe he ended up in the Kingdom of Sharon. Who knows? He could have been sold off as a slave. But again, I like this because both sides, Roxy and Sylphie, are technically acknowledging each other right now. And I think it's so sweet. And again, it kind of pushes out that remaining like hesitation that I have for this being a thing. Sylphie acknowledges Roxy did so much for Rudius. She knows what she did. It's like that whole aspect of Roxy not realizing why Rudius adores her so much. And she thinks it's because of her magic and that she's not inadequate enough. And Rudius won't ever tell her the truth. Sylphie sees it. Sylphie knows based on what Rudius told her about his master that she's done so much for him. And now that person's right next to her, she feels less than Roxy. So like with that first meeting, she was afraid this person that he admires so much is going to take him away from me. And even still kind of acknowledging the idea that the only reason I have Rudy is because I was here first. Which, yes, we all know from Rudy's perspective, that's not the case. It's not like he's thinking all the time, yeah, I'd ditch her for the fact that she was first. He's not that petty. He has some dumb thoughts, but he's not that petty. It's kind of that, again, that tragic aspect of the love triangle, is that who gets there first? One person kind of gets separated for a little bit, and this other person kind of jumps in there. I mean, it's the same for Edis. Because of this vague comment that she made on this letter and leaves, she lost him. And he hooked up with two other people at this point. But I love that statement by Sylphie. I don't want him to lose you, who he cherishes so much, just because I'm here. Again, it's breaking that element of traditional marriage. This idea that only one with one. Because I'm married with him, I don't want to be that block for him to be married with you. I don't want to be the reason why you would end up just walking away. Because yes, if she said, Rudy, no, I can't do this. I can't have you have another wife. Roxy would have walked away. She would have left that town. Even though she wants to be a teacher, I don't even think she would stay in that town. I don't even think she would have gone to the university. I don't think that she'd want to be there and be reminded about this thing that she fell in love with being right next to her and she can't touch it. And I think Sylphie knew that. I don't want my beloved to lose what he loves, which is a very powerful statement from her. Putting aside her own desires to have him to herself. Even after all the comments she made about Rajerd and how he's talking about Rajerd, she's still willing to say, go, Rudius. It's fine. And similarly to what I was talking about in the last Mushoku Mondays, this idea of Roxy herself being, truly at this point, welcomed into this family. Like with what happened to Aisha. Again, I don't think that Aisha is like sold on Roxy as being the greatest thing ever, but it was points up for Aisha that Roxy is a part of this family because she helped her out with something. Rudius was going to listen to me, and then Roxy came in and fixed the situation. I can trust her. She's somebody I can rely on. And this is where we're getting that sense of, again, the sister wives. Sylphie wants Roxy to be there. Let me say it again. I want you to be here. Because the only reason I'm here is because I got here first. And I don't want that to be the case. And I don't want that to hold you back. And it's also Sylphie really kind of pointing out that the only reason that I'm here is because you were there for Rudius. I would have been dead if it weren't for Rudius and Rudius's magic. And I would have never met Rudius if it weren't for you. And I would never learn that magic if it weren't for you teaching it to Rudius. She understands that sequence that happened that ultimately led to her being alive today and at Rudius' side. Sylphie, I think this is the first time I've said this in Mushoku Monday, Sylphie is dropping truth bombs. Anyways, I can talk about this segment for days, but I think I'm starting to repeat myself, so I'm going to move on. Once home, Rudius took time to go over what he had learned. Lightning was a tricky spell, but the basic concept was simple. You spread a huge amount of mana across the sky, then concentrate it to one location. Physically speaking, you create storm clouds, then fired off a bolt of lightning. Its destructive power was the greatest he had seen so far, which made sense. He didn't know any magic that demanded more raw power than cumulonimbus. And lightning concentrated that much energy into a single spot. Stone Cannon was his most lethal spell up until now, but this might have surpassed it. With this amount of gigawatts at his fingertips, he could launch himself into the future. Don't do that. Don't do that. You will regret it if you do that. You will regret it if you do that. The real secret behind the spell lay in the mana compression step. He was curious if any king tier spells of other disciplines might be applications of the same technique. This idea of like the earlier spells and just like compress it or just pour more mana into it. Getting through it once, he'd be able to use it silently in the future. He was also sure that he could speed up the cloud formation and compress it to drop the lightning faster. I can just see him like tied up in a room or something like that. It just drops lightning on it. Like if we cut to like Pax trapping him again inside that little barrier, even though he could technically break past that barrier now, just like suddenly this lightning is just destroying the castle as he's sitting down there going, you can let me out eventually. While he would practice with it, he wasn't sure if he'd get many chances to use it. It was a single target, and Stone Cannon was usually more than enough. You're already doing it, Rudius. Stop it. You said you wanted to get better. You said you wanted to essentially increase your equipment. And now you're going back to going, well, I'm good with this. This is exactly what kept you from advancing. He is saying that he's going to practice with it, but he's just not sure that he's ever going to use it. Lightning was kind of an overkill spell. It would be more useful if he could reduce its power. So I think that was kind of an interesting twist of this. And again, that's a whole aspect of him learning something and going, I could actually do this with it, and it would actually be a lot more useful. He's just kind of taking it apart and figuring out how it could actually be used in an everyday scenario. He tried a few smaller scale ones, and after several failed experiments, he stumbled across a way to generate a small electrical current. Rhea's going to turn into an electrical plant. It involved creating a tiny cumulonimbus spell, compressing it, and firing off lightning in the direction of its target. Cue the Darth Sidious thing. Zap. This resulted in a small, crackling bolt of electricity that could be directed with considerable accuracy. While not sure exactly how it worked, it seemed handy. Likely not suitable for extremely close range combat. You'd probably end up shocking yourself and your target. On the bright side, it wasn't going to do any lasting damage. At worst, you'd be incapacitated for some time. And yes, technically most attack spells risk you hurting yourself if you used it in close range. He still wanted to refine it more. Maybe stun an opponent instead of killing them. Lightning branched in the air to reach his targets, so it was impossible to avoid. It was also possible that it could disable someone protected by a battle aura. Interesting. I do like this aspect because yes, technically Rudius, he does have Quagmire. He does have the Mist. But he doesn't have any way of incapacitating somebody without killing them, like Stone Cannon or something that would harm them. So this is technically a way that he could knock somebody out. And yes, if it could get past a battle aura, that's huge. Because yes, even with his ways of incapacitating people currently, a battle aura can get them out of it. He didn't have anyone to test it on in the moment, but if Barigari came back, he'd ask him to be a guinea pig. keep bringing up Bodyguardi. I want Bodyguardi back already. Please, stop. Rudius just thinks like me, I guess. It's not so much that Rudius is teasing it, it's more the fact that he just thinks like me. I want Bodyguardi back. If anything, it'd be a nice surprise to pull out of his sleeve against a powerful foe. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Like, Orsted did that technically. When he was fighting Orsted was watching him going, wow, you did that. That's interesting. Wow. Very curious. He was intrigued by Rudius. He was an anomaly. What do you have this time, boy? Ooh, how did you do that with that lightning spell? I am very curious. Rudius ended up calling the smaller form Electric, so he can distinguish between them. What a productive day it had been. In more ways than one. In Legend of the University, number 6, the boss has an electric personality. And that is chapter 6. Such a good chapter. Oh, such a good chapter. Technically, like, these two chapters were so freaking good. Chapter 5 and 6 were such great chapters. So much emotion, so much advancement in the characters. Yes, some nostalgia moments. And like I said earlier, this whole last segment of this chapter was just so good. I love the creation of the Sister Wives. Let's just call it that. The Sister Wives has been officially confirmed. I really do think this is a massive step in Roxy and Sylphie. And again, I think it's partly to do with Roxy not really being as open as Sylphie is. Because like earlier, Sylphie's going, so how was he in bed? And Roxy's like, should I be answering that? And she's like, yeah, let's be comfortable with each other. I don't necessarily think... It just seemed like Roxy wasn't really ready for that. And as they're walking, it's like that moment of them kind of being a little bit tired or whatever. They're vulnerable and they're kind of opening themselves up to each other. Like I said, showing why they think the other person is better. And saying and admitting to each other this idea of, well, it just happened that way. Why prevent happiness from existing? That's the key thing. It's kind of a statement to everybody that doesn't want this to exist. Why not let happiness exist? Again, against my own personal beliefs, but it is what it is. But anyhow, that is chapter 6. We're slowly getting this volume. We'll eventually finish this volume. But as per usual, definitely appreciate you guys for dropping by. It was a fun little read here. Hopefully this video is not too long. I always say that, and it ends up not being too long, but we'll see. But I appreciate you guys for dropping by. Everybody that drops by for the premiere, hey chat, hit that like button if you've not already. Greatly appreciate it. Thanks everybody for their support, kind words, sharing this out, telling your friends, and especially all those that support monetarily through Patreon, tips link, becoming a member of the channel itself. Super thanks. All that kind of stuff. It means so much to me. It's you guys that keeps us going, all that positivity and everything. It continues to be my joy of the week. But with all that said, with all the mushy stuff out of the way, until the next Mushoku Mondays, y'all take care. Rudius had no right to criticize his faithless. Rudius had no right to criticize his faithlessness. Rudius had no right to criticize his faithlessness as a husband. Because I think only Timothy really pointed out, yeah, I'm familiar with it. Because I think the whole reason they went up to the north was because you never know when Adventure's going to dead. The tricky part was trying to find a way. The tricky part was trying to find out how. The tricky part was trying to find and preliminary scratches and preliminary preliminary. I hate when every now and then a word just fudges with me. Preliminary scratched out designs and preliminary after tying oh Sylphie, he buried his. Did you get a good look at this? Did you get a good look at that spell, right? Did you get a good look at that spell? Did you get a pretty red crystalline things of unusual size. A pretty red crystalline thing of unusual size. A pretty red crystallizing thing. A pretty red crystalline thing of an unusual of an unusual of an unu, 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 un, 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 un,